I am a vampire, yet I feel dizzy at the sight of blood and want to vomit at the smell of it. After trying to pass off tomato juice as real blood, I was kicked out. To avoid ending up on the streets, I decided to find a hapless victim to scam. In the next moment, I clutched my uninjured thigh and shouted at the luxury car behind me. Hurry up and give me $1 million, or I'll tell the police. 1. I scammed a handsome guy in a luxury car. He had a stunning face and 2 long legs that were nearly 6 feet tall. I lay on the ground, staring blankly at his face, which was dazzling even among vampires. He squatted in front of me, checking if I had knocked myself silly. Did you damage your brain? Who's the one with the damaged brain? I jumped up from the ground, glaring at him. He looked perfectly fine, but had no manners at all. Oh? Aren't you just fine? The handsome guy scoffed, looking me up and down. Crap, how could I forget the scam? I thought about sitting back down, but he had already opened the car door. I rushed over and clung to his thigh, wailing. Big brother! Have mercy on me. I've been kicked out and have no money. After failing to pull his leg away from me, he finally relented. Are you an adult? Not yet. I thought for a moment, looking at him guiltily. I wouldn't actually turn 18 until after midnight tonight, so that shouldn't count as lying, right? Fine, since you're not yet an adult, I'll give you a ride. Really? Thank you, handsome. I hurriedly jumped into the passenger seat, afraid he would change his mind. But my car isn't exactly safe. If something happens, don't blame me, he said while starting the engine. The cheerful mood I had suddenly turned cold. Could I skip this ride? 2. The supercar hit the highway and took off. I was anxious after what he had just said, fearing for my life. Your parents must be pretty laid back. Out this late at night. Aren't they worried about vampires snatching you up? The man tapped the steering wheel. I nervously glanced outside. After all, sitting next to him was a purebred vampire. This is a world where humans and vampires coexist. Although both races seem harmonious on the surface, dangers lurk beneath. Vampires need to feed on blood, and humans, being moving blood banks, are often at risk. But I was different. I was infamous among vampires for being useless. I get dizzy at the sight of blood and vomit at the smell of it. Whenever I couldn't stand it, I usually just went to a hot pot restaurant and ordered some duck blood to get by. As vampires approach adulthood, they must earn their blood from humans to symbolize their maturity. This was why my parents kicked me out. I tried to pass off fresh tomato juice as blood during my assessment. Where do you want to go? I definitely couldn't go back to my parents. After thinking for a bit, I casually mentioned a place. I could only run to my older brother, who was already an adult. Though I'd likely get an earful, it was better than ending up on the streets. The man nodded, his gaze flickering to the rearview mirror, then suddenly he slammed the accelerator. My soul nearly left my body as I panicked and asked, "What's going on?" "Just some bad company is chasing us." The man seemed unbothered, calmly gripping the steering wheel. But I couldn't stay calm, quickly turning to look behind us. Sure enough, 3 black sedans were following closely, forming a triangle around us. What is this, a scene from a Hong Kong crime drama? Big brother, you're not a fugitive, are you? The man turned to look at me, exasperation written on his face, and scoffed. What fugitive? I'm a wealthy second-generation heir. They're just here to kidnap me for ransom. I sat in the passenger seat, trembling with regret. Is this what I get for scamming? But the supercar was a supercar, quickly leaving them far behind. Just as I relaxed and slumped in my seat, I heard the man curse softly. Damn. The 3 cars had gunned it toward us, looking intent on stopping us at all costs. The supercar was hit and flipped over. The man had somehow shielded me, breathing heavily near my ear, his voice low. Sorry, I've gotten you mixed up in this crash. After the violent impact, everything went black, and I lost consciousness. 3. When I woke up, it was dark as pitch. I was protected in someone's arms, with only some minor scratches. Fortunately, as a vampire, my gifts were pretty impressive. I had immense strength and combat skills. I smashed the windshield with a punch and crawled out, also lifting the driver's seat to rescue the man. Thankfully, no one was around, otherwise, a little girl lifting a car would have scared them to death. The man's condition was much worse than mine, but at least his chest was still rising and falling, so he was probably just unconscious. As for the 3 sedans, they weren't so lucky. They had rolled down the slope and crashed into a boulder, their fronts crumpled and blood everywhere. The sight of blood made me dizzy, so I leaned on the car for support and fished a phone out of the man's pocket to call for an ambulance. Looking at the blood streaming from his elbow, a bold idea crossed my mind. Sorry, handsome, but this blood on the ground is a waste. If I just take a little to make up for the trouble you caused me, that's not too much to ask, right? Let's call it even for the car accident. With that thought, I took out a small vial from my pocket, whispered a prayer, and collected 2 drops of blood from his wound. I heard the ambulance approaching in the distance and quickly hid behind a tree. Goodbye, handsome. Oh no, for such an unlucky guy, it might be better if we never meet again. 4. But fate wasn't listening to my thoughts. Just a few days later, I encountered the unlucky handsome guy again. When I spotted him, he was cornered in an alley by several tall, muscular bodyguards in black. His lips were tightly pressed together, still defiant, with clear irritation in his eyes. In an instant, I quickly turned my face, trying to escape the scene, fervently praying he hadn't seen me. It wasn't that I was leaving him to die, it was just safer to call the police with that many people around. But it was too late, he had already seen me. Interest sparked in his eyes, and he said something to the burly men, who then approached me. What do you want? I restrained the impulse to slap them away and tried to resolve the issue civilly. Miss, we need you to come with us, the leader said, reaching out his hand toward me. In the next moment, as I swiftly swung my hand, the man clutched his arm and began rolling on the ground. It was clear I had broken his arm with that slap. Couldn't we talk it out? Did they have to force me to fight? Forget my parents' rigorous training, just my ability to slap a cow away was enough to deal with them. The remaining bodyguards gasped, and even the man watching from the side stared at me in disbelief. The bodyguards exchanged glances, and the next second, they all rushed at me. The man's expression turned cold, but before he could act, the sight before him shattered his worldview. I tossed the burly bodyguards aside like they were nothing, the alley filled with their screams. I squeezed my aching palm, feeling a bit melancholic. Turns out, I shouldn't slack off on training, just a few days without practice, and I was exhausted after taking down a few lackeys. Didn't see that coming, did you, kid? Your combat skills are impressive, the man suddenly stood before me, gazing at the corpses around us. You're almost on par with vampires. I looked at him, speechless. Why didn't he suspect I was a vampire? 5. Pujijo. The unlucky guy who first crashed into me and then got kidnapped, wanted to hire me as his personal bodyguard. 24 hours a day, always on call. There was no way I could agree to that. Setting aside the fact that a noble vampire wouldn't work for anyone, with his history of kidnappings, staying by his side might cost me my life. Song Jiaohao, a 5-figure daily salary. If I come out unscathed within a month, there's an additional 40% bonus. Pu Zhizhou lazily lounged on a soft couch, watching me wolf down food, speaking in a casual tone. It was as if the numbers he mentioned were just pocket change. Also, he drawled, looking at me, if I'm not mistaken, you've been kicked out again, right? Bang! I clutched my wounded heart, feeling as if he might cause me to bleed to death. He was right, I had indeed been kicked out again, and this time it was worse, I had been thrown out completely and my card had been suspended. I had nothing on me except an ID card. As for the reason, it was obvious, my powerful dad found out about the source of the blood and was furious, nearly collapsing from rage. I, Song Jiaohao, am a vampire with principles, but I can't just give up money because of them. I dashed over to Pu Zhizhou, flexed my arm muscles, and confidently assured him. Boss, Pu, don't worry. I'm professional. As long as I'm here, no one will lay a finger on you. Pu Zhizhou nodded in satisfaction, pulling out a card from his pocket and tossing it to me. With a racing heart and trembling hands, I carefully tucked the card into my pocket, my expression becoming more serious. I, Song Jiahao, vow to protect my benefactor. 6. Pu Zhizhou was wealthy, but he was unlike ordinary rich people, because he was extremely wealthy. His father was a notorious playboy, especially after his mother's death, fathering numerous illegitimate children. These individuals, along with those constantly looking to kidnap him for money, all had their eyes on him. But he didn't seem to care about any of that, like now, he was out having fun at night. Why are you following me? Pu Zhizhou raised an eyebrow, looking at me as I prepared to enter the bar with him. To go in with you, I said, confused, as if it were obvious. Minors aren't allowed in bars. He pointed at the sign on the door. I quickly pulled out my ID and handed it to him, grinning, I'm already an adult. Pu Zhizhou stared at the ID for a long time before tossing it back to me, snorting and trying to drag me out, saying, Even so, you still can't come in. Go home. But my agile body was not something he could catch easily. In a flash, I darted into the bar. I had never been to a place like this before and was curious. With a rare chance to enter, I had to enjoy myself. The dance floor was filled with people dancing energetically, and I felt an itch to join them. But before I could, Pu Zhizhou dragged me to a booth. Yo, Pu bro, who's this? Wow, she's so cute. Where did you find her? As soon as I sat down, a crowd of men and women, previously lost in their dancing, surrounded me, all curiously staring. Hello, big sister and handsome brother. I grinned widely, showing off my teeth. Charming people was my specialty. The crowd became even more excited, shrieking and trying to hug me, but Pu Zhizhou kicked them away mid-approach. Stay away from her. Pu Zhizhou sat down next to me, not being polite at all. Seeing him protect me like that, the crowd erupted in teasing laughter. A man in the front leaned in, smirking, didn't see that coming, huh, Pu bro? You like this type? I looked at Pu Zhizhou, waiting for him to take me out to play, but unexpectedly, he ordered a drink and just sat on the sofa as if that was all he planned to do. Want to have fun? Seemingly sensing my eager gaze, he asked me. I nodded vigorously, looking at him longingly. Jiangqi. Take her out and have fun, but don't go too wild. Pu Zhizhou summoned the man who had previously teased him, instructing him to take me along, reminding him a few times as he left. But he clearly misjudged me. Because I was going to go even wilder. Drinking, playing games, rolling dice, I could do it all, and before long, I had half the crowd drunk. In the end, Pu Zhizhou could no longer watch and dragged the drunken me out of the crowd. But he had clearly underestimated how shameless I could get after drinking. Watching Pu Zhizhou's handsome face sway in front of me, I suddenly kissed him right in front of everyone. After he pushed me away with a dark expression, I still whistled, teasing, Oh, little handsome guy, you've got quite a temper. The lively booth fell silent for a few seconds, and then the next moment erupted into loud cheers. Wow. Sis, you're awesome. Pu bro, just give in already, ha ha ha. Amidst the playful jeers, Pu Zhizhou's face grew even darker, and he grabbed me, dragging me out. Completely intoxicated, I waved longingly to everyone in the booth, entirely oblivious to what was happening. 7. Song Hao, I didn't expect you to be this bold. On the villa sofa, Pu Zhizhou pinned me down, gritting his teeth. I lay there dazed, laughing foolishly, and for some reason, I reached out to touch his face again. Little handsome guy, are you volunteering for a night together? Pu Zhizhou's face darkened completely. With a cold snort, he straightened up and said, I see you're still not sober. Saying that, he turned to grab a towel to throw at me. But unexpectedly, the next second, as the world spun around me, I pressed him down onto the sofa. Pujijo was stunned and tried to stand up. But how could he match my strength? The more he struggled, the tighter I held him down. After a few attempts to resist, he was completely pinned beneath me. Song Hao, let me go. Pujijo was on the verge of a breakdown. It seemed he hadn't been taken advantage of like this in over 20 years. I struggled to sit up from the sofa, swaying as I looked at him. The next moment, I slapped my palm against Pujijo's solid chest, shouting, "Great! I like this kind of spirited little handsome guy." Pujijo fell completely silent. Realizing he couldn't escape my grasp, he resignedly dropped his hands and stared at me as I wreaked havoc on him. Suddenly, I felt less enthusiastic and shook him a bit, asking, "Why aren't you resisting? Is there something on your mind?" Song Hao, think carefully. If you keep touching me, you'll have to take responsibility. Pujijo slightly lifted his chin, looking at me. Take responsibility? I murmured, and the next moment, I licked my lips and touched his abs again, acting like a flower thief. Don't worry. I will definitely take responsibility. Pujijo was panting, and just as his hands climbed around my waist, I tilted my head and collapsed onto him, falling fast asleep. Song Hao. In the massive villa, only the echo of Pujijo's gritted teeth and my snores filled the air. 8. The next day, I rubbed my eyes and woke up on the sofa. But the sofa beneath me was hard and hot. I squinted and touched it several times, when suddenly, Pujijo's hoarse voice came from beside me. Have you had enough touching? What the heck? I jolted and rolled off him, trembling as I looked at the person sitting on the sofa. Pujijo? Pujijo leisurely sat up from the sofa, straightening his disheveled clothes and asked, "Oh, you're awake?" His tone carried a hint of disdain and mockery. What did you do to me? I looked down at my messy clothes in disbelief. What did I do to you? Pujijo snorted coldly, tossing his phone in front of me. On the screen, a video of me acting drunk in the bar played. Oh my god. After the video ended, I squatted down, holding my head in a daze. Not only did I get drunk last night, but I also took advantage of Pujijo? What are you going to do? Pujijo asked slowly while fixing his clothes. I glanced at him with a guilty conscience, feeling uncertain. It seemed he wouldn't let me off that easily. You can make demands, after all, I was the one at fault, I said, bracing myself. Pujijo fell silent for a long while before walking up to me. He lifted my chin with one hand, his charming eyes locking onto mine for a moment, then his thin lips parted. Have you ever done this to anyone else before? No. No. Absolutely not. I quickly raised my hand to swear. Pujijo nodded in satisfaction, pressing me down in front of the coffee table, and said in a low voice. From now on, you can't touch other men. He paused slightly, then gritted his teeth, adding, even if you do, you can only touch me, understood? His hot breath streamed down my collar, startling me upright. What does this mean? 9. One day, I was idly wasting time when I suddenly received a message from Pujijo. Accompany me to a party tonight. The clothes have already been delivered to your door. A party? In such a crowded place, having a personal bodyguard makes sense. Feeling a bit guilty about receiving such a high salary for doing nothing, I was naturally willing to help out. I happily carried 2 boxes from the door and opened one. Inside was a set of custom-made suits, perfectly tailored with no excess wrinkles, clearly worth a fortune. Wow. I pulled it out of the box with starry eyes, unable to help but exclaim. As expected of a wealthy family, even the clothes for a bodyguard are so nice. I tried it on, but, well, it was a bit big. No matter, let's try it on first. In the bathroom, I took countless selfies in front of the mirror. Indeed, the saying clothes make the man is true. Putting on this suit transformed me entirely, instantly elevating my aura. This would definitely attract some college girls. How's the outfit? Pu Zhizhou messaged me. I'm very satisfied. I quickly replied. Good, get ready. I'll be home soon. He's coming home? I was taken aback, and a smile crept uncontrollably onto my face as I chuckled to myself. 10. When Pu Zhizhou opened the door to the house, the interior was pitch black, not a single light was on, and even the curtains were drawn tightly. As soon as he turned on the lights, I suddenly dashed from the corner to stand in front of him. Surprise! I was dressed in the luxurious suit, striking a pose, wearing sunglasses, and holding a dried flower I had specially plucked from a vase. I watched as Pu Zhizhou's face changed from white to green to black, and finally, he erupted in anger, shouting at me. Song Hao Hao! Why are you stealing my clothes? Huh? His clothes? I froze in place, looking at him and awkwardly smiling while maintaining politeness. This is your outfit? Pu Zhizhou didn't respond but pulled out a pure white little dress from another box, smiling as he looked at me. If that's your outfit, do I have to wear this? I couldn't help but imagine what Pu Zhizhou would look like in that little dress. The feeling of his touch from that night still lingered in my memory, even though I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. I could roughly imagine his 8-pack abs and toned waist. I fidgeted and stammered, well, that wouldn't be a problem. The next moment, a small dress came flying at my head, accompanied by Pu Zhizhou's furious shout. Get out of here! Here's the precise translation of your text into English, keeping the chapter formatting. 10. The little dress that Pu Zhizhou picked out was indeed quite beautiful. But for a personal bodyguard, it was clearly not a practical dress, after all. I wouldn't be able to kick during a fight. I kept talking to Pu Zhizhou about this on the way to the venue. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and directly covered my mouth. When we get to the venue, you don't need to say anything. Just smile and nod when they ask you something. Isn't that asking me to pretend to be mute? And also, the party will have all sorts of people, including vampires. Watch your neck. I nodded obediently. Pu Zhizhou finally relaxed and drove towards the center of the venue. At the party, many people who came to talk to Pu Zhizhou assumed I was his girlfriend. Although I wanted to protect my reputation, I had already promised Pu Zhizhou, so I could only smile and nod at them. Soon, someone noticed something was off. A middle-aged man scrutinized me for a moment and then cautiously asked Pu Zhizhou. Mr. Pu, is your girlfriend? He pointed to his throat and shook his head. Clearly, he was asking if I couldn't speak. Without thinking, I just smiled and nodded at him. A look of sympathy immediately appeared on his face. By the time I realized what had happened, he had already walked away, while Pu Zhizhou looked at me with a deadpan expression. Song Jiahao, it does you no good to make me angry. And you'll lose a clueless boss who pays your salary. My smile immediately froze on my face, and I cautiously asked. Boss, you're not going to fire me, right? 11. Pu Zhizhou took me along until we reached a man. President Pu. The man's voice sounded somewhat familiar. I quickly looked up and our eyes met. I was stunned. Could someone tell me why my brother was here? Song Jiahao also noticed me, raising an eyebrow and asking, this is my personal bodyguard. I quickly interjected, giving a sheepish smile to the bemused Pu Zhizhou. Though Pu Zhizhou didn't understand my reasoning, he nodded in acknowledgement. Still with a dark expression. Song Jiahao nodded knowingly, but I could tell he didn't believe it. After the two exchanged business pleasantries, Pu Zhizhou pulled me into a corner and said, Song Jiahao, don't let that guy's face dazzle you. He's a vampire. If he gets you, be careful of being drained dry. Pu Zhizhou warned me. I nodded weakly. Pu Zhizhou thought I was just tired from wandering around, sighing helplessly. Find a spot to sit, and I'll come to get you later. Just as I plopped down in the lounge area, my phone buzzed. It was my brother. Come outside. Oh no. 12. The evening breeze chilled my sleeves. I cautiously glanced at Song Jiahe, too afraid to speak. "What's your relationship with that Pooh guy?" I spoke so softly it was like a mosquito buzzing, feeling guilty. "I already said, it's just a regular employment relationship." "Better hope it is." "Song Jiahe, don't forget about all our ancestors who loved humans, think of their tragic endings. Consider the vampire clan's taboos," he advised earnestly. "If you dare to get involved with him, I'll personally drag you back home," he warned, giving my shoulder a stern pat. Even he would be hunted by the vampire clan. My heart sank, and I didn't dare to look up at him anymore. 13. I made a decision, I had to leave Pooh Jizhou. Smart vampires would resolve issues quickly. But as I packed my things, I realized that this massive villa was now filled with my belongings. I had spent so much of Pooh Jizhou's money, and now I was abandoning him. What a terrible person I was. As I carried my suitcase down from the second floor, I found Pooh Jizhou lying on the sofa. He looked at me and asked, "What's up? Going on a trip?" I took a deep breath and shouted with all my might. "Jizhou-kun, I'm quitting. This quit means a lifetime." Ah. It wasn't until I placed the keys on the coffee table that he reacted, grabbing my hand. "No, why are you suddenly leaving? Is it that you're unhappy with your salary? I can increase it. A 5-figure daily salary to support a slacker like me?" I could have cried. He kept speaking while trying to push a black card into my hand. I didn't take it but looked at him with red eyes. "Pooh Jizhou, don't you understand? I'm a vampire." His face instantly turned pale as he stared at me. My unusual strength, my extremely high combat ability, those things he had deliberately avoided were now laid bare before him. Pooh Jizhou was so smart, I didn't believe he hadn't suspected anything. But the rift of our races could never be crossed. Rather than waiting until the last moment when we'd have to sever ties, it was better to cut things off now. Okay, I don't mind." He suddenly grasped my hand, his tone humble, to the ground. "It doesn't matter if you need to drink blood, as long as you don't leave me." Tears began to flow uncontrollably down my face, and I scolded him with a choked voice. "Pooh Jizhou, are you love-struck? Are you willing to risk your life?" "Yes, I am. Please, How, don't leave me all alone." He pressed his forehead against my palm, like a devout believer in prayer. I forced myself to withdraw my hand. I was terrified that if I stayed even one more second, I would regret it. "You clearly promised to take responsibility for me back then." By the last line, Pooh Jizhou's voice trembled significantly, but all he received in response was the sound of the door closing. 14. Actually, on the first day after leaving Pooh Jizhou, I curled up in bed and cried my heart out. I'm a nostalgic vampire, and I think I've fallen for Pooh Jizhou, but I must leave him. According to the experiences of my predecessors, interspecies love never ends well. Song Jiahe tried to come in and comfort me, but I pushed him away. But what good is crying? Life must go on. One day, while I was carrying freshly bought duck blood to replenish my energy, a woman stopped me. She wore a snow-white dress, heavily scented with perfume, and covered her nose while glaring at me. "You're Song Jiahe? Pooh Jizhou's former bodyguard?" At that moment, I was in slippers, still smelling of sweat from my early morning market battle. I was taken aback and nodded, Who are you?" The woman, upon receiving my confirmation, became arrogant. "I'm Pooh Jizhou's childhood sweetheart, Su Wen. I'm here to invite you to our engagement party." That name, which I had intentionally tried to forget but had popped into my mind countless times, resurfaced. After all this time apart, he has a fiancée? I felt a sharp pain, as if being cut by a knife, and repeatedly cursed myself inside. "Song Jiahe, didn't you say you were leaving him? What are you feeling upset about now?" There was no way I would attend that engagement party. After I refused, I tried to squeeze past her while carrying bags of duck blood. She panicked and grabbed my arm. With that grip, the duck blood I was holding fell to the ground, staining a large area bright red. The look in the woman's eyes turned strange, and she trembled, pointing at me, unable to say a complete sentence. I quickly raised my other hand to explain, but the other bag of duck blood also dropped, splattering her snow-white dress. Ah! 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 Murderer! Her shrill scream echoed through the air, and soon several patrolling police surrounded me. I raised my hands innocently. Officers, please let me explain. 15. At the police station, the officers quickly figured out the whole situation, looking at me with mixed expressions. After all, who has a vampire obsessed with duck blood? I wanted to call Song Jiahe, but he didn't answer. After thinking for a long time, I could only call Pu Zhizhou. Coincidentally, his fiancée was also there. Though it hurt, I still had to clarify things. As soon as Pu Zhizhou arrived at the station, he rushed in front of me, checking to see that I was okay before turning his ire towards Su-wen. Su-wen, you are not my childhood sweetheart. If you keep bothering my people, I will call the police. The woman's eyes were red from crying, and she sobbed, but, Pu Gij, we've known each other since we were little. No, just because I knew you as a child doesn't mean I have to marry you. If I knew so many people as a child, does that mean I have to marry them all? The woman broke down, and so did Pu Zhizhou, grabbing his hair and yelling. I, along with several onlookers, couldn't help but burst out laughing. The woman, probably feeling embarrassed, shot me a fierce glare and ran out. After that, Pu Zhizhou dragged me out of the police station. 16. The atmosphere in the car was incredibly awkward, as if we were waiting for someone to speak first. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Pu Zhizhou. Humph. He turned his head and huffed. Who was that woman? I asked. I have nothing to do with her. I just knew her as a child. Please believe me. Before I could finish speaking, he hurriedly interjected, desperately explaining. I stared at him, and only then did he realize how humble his attitude was. Believe it or not. After a brief silence, he couldn't hold back. How have you been lately? All my grievances and longings seemed to find an outlet in that moment. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. Not well at all. The duck blood I bought this morning spilled everywhere. He quickly fumbled for tissues to wipe my tears. Don't cry, I'll take you to buy some more. Really? I sniffed, but suddenly deflated. Forget it, at this hour, they're probably sold out. Let's look for it. Pu Zhizhou said nonchalantly. At worst, I'll just buy you a duck farm. Vampires in a blood deficiency period are particularly sensitive, and I burst into tears, hugging him tightly. Pu Zhizhou held me, and after a while, he muttered. Okay, let's go back together. I really can't bear to have anyone else take care of you. I buried my face in his embrace and nodded vigorously. In that moment, all the Blood Clan taboos and wanted notices faded from my mind. As we were in a warm atmosphere in the car, suddenly the car was jolted by someone hitting it. Ah? Who's trying to harm you again? The scene was all too familiar, almost identical to when I first rode in his car. I turned my head to look back and saw a white sedan pushing against the rear of our car. And in the driver's seat was Su-wen, her eyes red and fixed on us. No, she can't be trying to take us down just because she was rejected, right? In fact, with Pu Zhizhou's driving skills, it wouldn't be difficult to shake her off, but the problem was, this wasn't a deserted highway at night, it was a busy city road. If Pu Zhizhou swerved, it would inevitably affect more vehicles. Thus, in the end, I threw myself onto Pu Zhizhou, pressing him down tightly. At that moment, I thought that a vampire's body should be stronger than an ordinary human's, and then there was the rolling car and darkness. 17. When I woke up again, it was a week later. I was wrapped up like a dumpling, lying in a hospital bed. Just moving my fingers made Pu Zhizhou, who was resting beside me, wake up with a start. Jiahao. you're awake?" His bloodshot eyes glanced at me before he hurriedly leaned on his crutch to call for a doctor. "Hey, you're awake?" My brother walked in, implying, "If you didn't wake up soon, everyone would have been worried sick." I knew he was talking about Pujijo. I turned my eyes, wanting to ask what happened. He sighed and explained everything to me. The flipped car had crashed into a tree, and I had passed out. Pujijo had been pinned beneath me and only sprained an ankle. After the doctor examined me, they found I had no major issues, besides some scrapes, but just couldn't wake up. They called my brother to ask if I had any medical conditions. But only my brother knew that for a purebred vampire, this was the most dangerous situation. A vampire's body would enter a brief hibernation state when subjected to severe harm, but once the hibernation ended, it was as if half a leg had crossed into the gates of death. He believed Pujijo had the right to know everything, so he told him everything. There was indeed a solution. He would sign a blood contract with me, becoming my blood servant. In the moment of signing the blood contract, the blood clan would gain immense protective power, strong enough to heal my injuries. But for a human, signing the contract was more akin to a master-servant agreement. From then on, I wouldn't feel his pain, but if I were hurt, he would experience the same pain. This was an extremely unequal contract. And this was also a trial every human in love with a vampire had to face. Song Jiahe hadn't expected Pujijo would go to such lengths for me, which was why I had to leave him. "Brother," I pleaded with red eyes. "I understand now. Don't worry. I'll handle the clan's matters, and no one will hinder you again." He sighed and affectionately patted my head. Just then, Pujijo entered with the doctor. After confirming I was no longer in danger, the room was left with just me and Pujijo. "Pujijo, you big fool. Why did you sign that contract?" I touched the faint blood mark on his forehead, asking with a choked voice. He nudged his forehead against my fingertip, murmuring, "Now you know I'm good?" He looked up at me, his voice very low. "Jiahao, we won't be apart again, right?" I shook my head vigorously, pressing my forehead against his, saying, "Pujijo, we'll be together for a lifetime. Until the end of our lives."